So hello everyone. I'm Felix Kuperjans from Testbirds GmbH in Munich. And today I'm going to present On the Road, Test Automation in Practice with the BMW Map Update Service. And the agenda for today, I will shortly introduce myself and the Testbirds company. Then I'm going to introduce the components that we used in this automated test, which is Jubula, an Eclipse plugin for UI testing and test automation. Then the BMW Download Manager, which is the application that was tested. And the Test Chameleon cloud infrastructure from Testbirds that was used to host the test environments. Then I will explain the flow, how the test actually works, what is executed. And I will bring I brought a small video because of potential limitations of the internet connection here. So I recorded everything on video, how this test actually works in practice. And then I'm going to make a small conclusion. So Testbirds is a company that is still quite young. It was founded in 2011, mainly starting with a concept called crowd testing. It means we have a lot of people, currently it's 200,000, that test apps for us in test projects. And they are sitting on the couch and testing the app of our clients. And the second thing that we built up is the cloud technology, which is also one part of it is Test Chameleon, that I will also introduce later in more detail. And generally, we are doing all kinds of innovative testing services and products. And we have a very high client satisfaction, a lot of clients, especially from Europe. And we also won the German Innovation Award, for example. And I am Felix Kuperjans. I have a bachelor degree from Technical University of Munich. And I started working for Testbirds in 2013. And I'm mainly developing this Test Chameleon cloud technology. And you can also contact me if you have any further questions. And now I'm going to introduce the components of this whole test scenario, what we used to make this test possible. So one is Jubula, an Eclipse plugin that is also part of this Eclipse for Testers bundle of Eclipse. And the Jubula itself is also mainly developed by Bredex. And it is used to test native GUI applications of all kinds. So it could be Java applications, it could be even web portals or whatever. And following this whole behavior-driven development or testing approach. That means the intended behavior of the application, similar to a use case, but more specifically specified in a test case, is described. And this high-level description of individual test scripts is then mapped to automated interactions that can also be reused. So I can have things like, given I'm logged in on the client dashboard, and then this whole thing logging into the client dashboard or verifying that you're logged in can be automated and reused all the time. And it's integrated to the Eclipse IDE. And there are lots of interesting features with it, and especially also in the standalone distribution, there are also command line tools to run the automated tests. And this kind of operation is something I will later explain in more detail. Then the BMW map updating. So what is this service? So it's there to update the maps of navigation systems in the car. And it's part of this whole connected drive portal. So first of all, you log in as a client on your browser with your connected drive credentials. And the question may arise, why don't you just download the app as a whole? But the point is, the maps are pretty large. So we're talking about 20, 30, 40 more gigabytes. And it's more convenient for the user if actually the maps are downloaded by a dedicated tool, that is this BMW Download Manager. So this tool is downloaded from the connected drive portal, installed on the PC of the client. And then using this tool, you can download the actual map file and put it on a USB stick. And this USB stick is then inserted in your car and installs the map to the car. And this also helps clients, for example, if the internet connection is slow, they can suspend or resume downloads and things like this. And then we have our product, the Test Chameleon cloud technology. So when you're having these kinds of integration projects where you do end-to-end testing on different platforms, one common problem is, where do I actually get all the platforms? So you want to test on several versions of Windows, on versions of Mac. Maybe you have a mobile app that you want to test on different Android and iOS devices, or you even want to test on Linux. So you would have to organize a lot of these actual devices or operating systems. So it's already quite common to use virtualization, but still the question arises, who sets up the VM, who manages all the software on the VM, who manages the updates, and our Test Chameleon Cloud basically automates this process. So you can order any kind of operating system and install various software on it. So you could have a Windows 7 and install the newest Firefox, and maybe a Java version, and maybe some extra software for testing like Jubula standalone. And then you can use this virtual machine for your automated test. And we also have basically every common end user operating system ready. And for the mobiles, we even have the actual physical devices as part of our so-called global real device network. That means we take all the devices in our cloud and connect them to our cloud technology. So using our cloud, you can actually access the Samsung S5 of someone who has registered that for usage with our cloud. Or obviously, we also offer all of these in private and dedicated on-premise solutions. So you can even have your own devices connected to our cloud or connected to a dedicated local instance of our software. And the whole thing is mainly used for manual or automated testing. So you can use a browser to actually control the devices manually, or run automated tests using various tools, including, for example, Selenium and Appium. They are very common for web and app testing, but also a lot of other tools, like, for instance, Jubula, or some commercial tools like, for instance, there's Ranorex or the Tricentis Tosca test suite. Also with them, it's possible to use the Test Chameleon Cloud. And this kind of testing, one of the questions is also, why should I actually do UI testing? Well, the reason is you're modeling the actual user workflow, the user story that you ultimately wanted to achieve. And this kind of end-to-end testing is a very good way to ensure that the full stack that you were developing actually works. And the second thing is, it's very easy to translate the UI tests to different platforms and to perform the user interactions on, for instance, different browsers. And yeah, our cloud itself is very flexible. It can also be connected to your local network or whatever. And one of the special USPs of this cloud solution is that you always have full control of the cloud. So in this scenario, we are also using it to create a VM and then to use different tools in a row on that virtual machine and to install this download manager on the VM. So you can actually make use of any features that you would have on your own operating system. Now I'm going to explain what tools we used for this test. So the first step in the scenario is downloading the BMW download manager from the connected drive portal. We decided to do this as a common Selenium test, which is also one of the most popular frameworks for web testing. So Selenium actually controls the browser and makes the required user interactions to download the file of this download manager. And the app that we downloaded using this web test is then tested with Jubula. And yeah, it's a JavaFX application. So that's a very common UI framework for modern Java applications. And Jubula has a special JavaFX testing connection, which is very handy in this case. And we do the whole scenario with both tests in a single test run on a single virtual machine. And the whole execution, also to perform this test on different platforms, is managed with the Jenkins continuous integration system. So, like in the previous talk, we are also using Jenkins for that. It's a very powerful CI system. And this whole Jubula setup is done with Jubula distributed testing using the AUT agents. I'm going to explain that a little bit more in detail. So once you have developed your Jubula test case locally using the Jubula UI, you can have optionally AUT agents running on other machines, and you can connect to these, and then using this connection, execute the actual test, so controlling the actual application or browser on this target machine, while the whole test definition and the whole result collection and everything happens on your local PC. And this can be also scripted using a tool called Testexec. And that is a command line tool that you could run, for instance, also on Linux. If your Jenkins server happens to run on a Linux server, it can basically perform this as a shell command. And then the Jenkins runs the Testexec command, which connects to the AUT agents. And these AUT agents run on the virtual machines in our cloud. So you don't have to upload the whole test case and then download the test results. You can run the tests on your local Jenkins instance, and only the actual interaction is performed in the virtual machine. And this test definition of Jubula is stored in a database. So you can use a database to connect with Eclipse and with the Testexec to the current state of your test definition. And the results can be collected in various formats. So there's a nice HTML report, or you could do a JUnit report. I think that's one of the newer features there. And they can also be integrated then into your Jenkins setup. So the Jenkins shows the result files from the build. And now, what are the individual steps of this test? So Jenkins starts our own Java application that basically is just a few lines of code to manage the actual different steps. And the first steps done in this code is starting the VM using TestChameleon with our TestChameleon API. And then it performs a regular Selenium web test that does the whole interaction with the BMW connected drive portal and downloads the BMW download manager. And then we are again using some methods from our API to execute the commands for executing the setup of this download manager and to start the AUT agent on the VM. And after that, we use Testexec to execute the Jubula test case on the AUT agent in the VM. And finally, Jenkins collects all the results from the Selenium test and the Jubula test and generates a report from that. And all of that is then repeated on different VMs. So for instance, it could be Windows 7 and Windows 10, or also a lot of other platforms. Although I will only present it on one single VM for this presentation in the demo, because otherwise we would potentially run out of time. And the whole test with the different VMs, that can either be done one after the other. So you could first test on Windows 7, then test on Windows 8, then test on Windows 10, or you could even run the test in parallel. So you can have multiple VMs that execute the test steps in parallel to actually make the whole test execution faster. Now I want to present a small video how this actually looks like. See if this works inline. I guess I'm gonna play that directly. Nope, wrong screen, sorry. Yeah, so this is the video. Here we can see our Jenkins instance. I made a small reduced test for this EclipseCon presentation. So this is how the Jenkins project looked like, and the first step is that I just press on build now. It could also be done by post-commit hooks or whatever, but here I just manually started it, and then you can see the console output, which is basically performing a Maven build of this Java application that manages the whole test. And now I'm actually switching to our Nest platform. And on this platform, you can manually see what the VMs are actually doing. So here we can see this VM called Hub. That is, first of all, also a Selenium hub for the Selenium grid interactive testing. And secondly, this hub also acts as the router in the internal network. So there's a dedicated network where this test VM and our Jenkins is in, so that also this connection to the AUT agent is possible. And we can see this Windows 7 VM for this BMW test. It was first booting, now it's installing software, and installs, for example, Jubula and the recent Chrome. And after it is done with installing the software, it will then start the actual test execution steps. And installing the software and booting usually takes, depending on which platform you run and how much software you install, a couple of minutes. With smaller VMs, also just 1 or 2 minutes. So here we see also our web portal with which you can interact with the VM. You can also pick resolutions, do clipboard sharing, and all this like nicer stuff for manual interaction. And here we're just using it to present the test that is now starting. So here's a Chrome started by Selenium. So you can also see this message that Chrome is controlling this instance, and it now performs the login to the BMW connected drive portal. And in this portal, the first thing you do is you select the car. So this is a demo account that has a bunch of fake cars, and now selects one of these cars and goes to the section map update with the manual USB stick version of updating and downloads the Windows version. So here we can see Chrome already downloaded the file, and we are closing the Selenium test. So what now happens is we have to install with the setup this BMW download manager application. This is done using the silent install method, because ultimately in this test we didn't want to test the actual setup steps, but the program that is installed and the web test. The reason is that the setup is generated by some JavaFX bundling, and the UI of it is not too special at this point. And one little thing that this test does is it already starts an instance of the application. So we can see it opening here. But a small problem in the test execution was that this instance cannot be used for a test automation because it's not started by an AUT agent. But what we do to solve this is we simply kill the instance. That is happening now. And then we start the AUT agent. So if you look down there at the clock, you will see that now the AUT agent starts and has a small desktop icon there. Here now the AUT agent runs. And using Jubula now, we will, with this test exec, connect to the AUT agent, which will then use this install JavaFX application of the BMW download manager and perform the steps to go to the actual map downloading. This will happen now. So now the Jubula test started. The first thing it does is it opens the window, and then it takes some time to activate and take control. And then it will start interacting with this native desktop application. And first of all, you have to log in again, select the car again, and then you start the download. And now the download actually starts. It's a quite huge file, in this case 23 gigabytes. So what we did for this demo, the test actually will abort the download after a fixed timeout. But obviously the real test can also download the whole application, the whole map file, and then verify that it's there. But showing the whole test would probably be a bit too extensive for this session here. So now we can see the VM finished the whole test. It also got destroyed. So all our VMs are completely disposed after the test. And the results were collected in Jenkins. And now the next VM is booting. So here there would be Windows 10. But we're actually not showing the whole thing because it's basically the same stuff again. So now a small conclusion. What actually does this achieve, and what were the experiences that we had during this project? So generally UI testing is a very good method to test through the whole user story of our clients and to automate this end-to-end test on different platforms. In this case, it was especially Windows platforms and some Mac OS X. And with our cloud solution, you can actually get all those platforms that you need in the cloud. So you don't have to actually set up any platforms. You basically just have your own Jenkins or other CI instance and run the test from there. And this remote test execution feature of Jubula, that is a very interesting feature, and it also shows that it runs on our cloud, which always requires some kind of network interconnection between the system running the test, like in this case the Jenkins, and our cloud virtual machines. And actually, in the very first part of the setup, we had a more hacky solution because the problem is that the AUT agent also connects back to test exec, which listens at a port. So one of our problems was that this is done by hostname resolution. But sometimes the Jenkins has an internal hostname that is not resolvable via public DNS. So we can use our methods to control the DNS server to create a static entry for the virtual machines. But actually, we made a feature request to Predix, which was luckily solved very fast. And this allows specifying an IP and a port on the test exec, which is used to listen on the Jenkins for the connections from the AUT agent. And there we can also directly enter the IP address of this virtual network with the VMs. So it becomes possible that this network connection runs without performing special modifications in the DNS. So the only thing that is still needed is basically the virtual network between the Jenkins or the other PC that's running test exec and our cloud using a VPN tunnel. And also, a very cool thing about this test is actually that we combined this web test of the portal with the actual application test afterwards. So actually, you can test the full user story that basically starts with I log into the connected drive portal and ends with I have the map on my USB stick and go to my car. So we obviously didn't test the part in the car, at least not on our cloud or company, but that was the job of BMW to test that part. But we could test basically the whole part that is going on the user side. And yeah, this was a quite interesting project. And now I would like to hear if you have any questions. Yeah, but actually the Mac testing was quite difficult in the beginning. The problem is that we are using Mac virtual machines and they have no actual hardware graphics card. Normally, especially for the simple UI applications, that shouldn't be a too big deal, but it happens to be the case that JavaFX uses OpenGL to render everything on your window. And actually there's a bug in the Oracle JDK version 8 that actually this fallback code that is required on OS X to switch from an AMD or NVIDIA or Intel graphic driver to the fallback software renderer of Apple was not properly programmed. So there's even an Oracle bug report, but the problem is they only fixed it for JDK and Java 9. Which means there's no fix at all for Java 8. And this leads to the requirement that you have an actual physical Mac as part of the test infrastructure here, which for these Macs obviously made part of this cloud benefit that you don't need the hardware, in this case not possible. So I could perform the whole web test in the virtual machine, but the JavaFX test was kind of pointless because there was nothing on the window, and it also didn't run properly, but it would run on a native Mac. So this is one of the cases where you actually need a device, and this is also something that we offer as part of our cloud. So you can have an actual device if there's a reason for it, but usually it works fine in the virtual machines as well. But the Apple software renderer has some limitations compared to Windows. Yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, we have the Selenium testing there in the framework, which does the UI interactions. And actually, these tests in the beginning were also executed against Prelife environments from BMW. So it was not the actual connected drive portal. And this specific download is actually just a link to a mirror where the different versions of the applications are. So it was desired that the whole user story is tested, but we could in the end also split it into two parts and only download a specific version and do a different web test first. That's also interesting if testing with different browsers and finally downloading the same file to the same kind of virtual machine, you wouldn't need to run the Jubula test in all of these cases. It's sufficient to run a bunch of web tests with different browsers and to test one of the downloaded files on that platform. So that was also where we didn't need as much physical Macs as was originally, or which would have been required if we had to use also the different browser versions there, because we only did the Jubula part on a real physical Mac then. And basically, both was initially still under development, so there was neither a public release for the one or the other. But now actually everything is also available in production. And this showed just the public version, so no pre-live stuff was involved there. That's actually how it would work if you log in today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, so that's also one of the points why we would execute both tests in one virtual machine. So if the file had something like a plugin or a small modification or extension that actually would say, for example, the car preference that you made already for the final app, then the whole point of using specifically the version that was downloaded would actually ensure that also these settings can be tested in the second step. But then obviously the test matrix basically is on how many systems do I test with which parameters, the whole thing would grow pretty much. So one would have to decide if actually this full product of possible choices is the right way to go, or if you just test a bunch of settings on all of the operating system and then on one or two specific operating systems, all the different settings, for instance. So for UI test automation, it's very good to look at the platform details and the different user stories that actually vary in what they actually perform, and not to do a large test of different data sets. Because the whole point is that just the data sets can be handled by component or unit tests more efficiently. So testing that it works with 10,000 login credential pairs is something that you would do on a lower level than on UI testing. Although it's obviously also possible to just test the whole data set with Selenium, but it would take a lot of time. Yes?
How often do you run those tests? Because installing the software all the time, downloading 23 gigabytes, stuff all the time, that takes ages.
Yes, that takes ages. I mean, not necessarily ages, but you wouldn't test every single commit using the full procedure that takes more than 2 hours. So generally, that's also why we have a lot of test cases that don't download the full map, because that's obviously the biggest part of it. So aborting it, testing settings, testing different kinds of settings is a reduced set of test cases that you can execute in like 10 to 20 minutes. So it's usually advisable that you, if you have a very large test suite of UI tests that perform a lot of interactions, and we have lots of clients where the full test suite actually takes hours. It makes sense to have like some core tests or quick tests that you can run very often, and then to run the large tests only nightly or weekly, or even sometimes only on demand. Any more questions? Or also maybe questions about our product or about Jubula? Good.
Thank you.
Then